Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Packet Live. It is March 11th, another sunny day in LA, and maybe a different weather depending on where you live. But
Indeed.
good to see you guys.
Yeah, nice to be seen. It is actually, yeah, like you said, a very nice day in SoCal. How's it out in the mid
Pretty
Paris?
nice.
Paris?
It was a little rainy early on, but it's pretty nice now.
Nice.
All right.
My weather is not quite like yours. I get a lot more rain, but
Yeah,
it's still very comfortable weather. No snow.
no
Yeah,
snow.
there we
Yeah,
go.
that's not the vibe.
Not the vibe, not the vibe. Well, yeah, on our end, we've been obviously hard at work, kind of chasing down what I guess is the tail end of this transaction. Few more weeks of work at Piers, and um, you know that's been keeping us very busy.
Yeah,
um, but yeah, it's certainly an interesting little kind of like moment in the world with regards to you know geopolitical scenarios, and there's just a lot going on, a lot going on. I was going to check the price of Bitcoin today. I hadn't looked yet.
70,
Strong 70.
70 and a half.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. It was at
yeah. Almost 71.
69.7.
I've got that little swipe thingy on the Mac setups for
Mm.
Bitcoin,
Just
Ethereum,
whether you're
oil.
or not.
We added oil,
There
89, and gold.
you go.
Gold and the S&P are down a little bit.
There we go.
Oil coin is a pumping.
Is it?
Well, 80. I mean, it was 71 before this whole debacle. Now it's 89,
Hmm.
and it took a little detour down to low 80s, but it's back, and it maxed. Oh, it maxed out over 100. It was 104, 106, I think, at some point. But
All
yeah,
right. Well, maybe if we keep blowing up some more oil refineries, it'll just keep going up,
no, oil's going to be weird about this, and the reason's because it's one of those things where with some things the price can just go astronomical, and it works. It's okay, but like when oil gets too high, a bunch of other stuff breaks, and it just causes the whole economy to collapse. So oil, I mean, I think 150 is possible, especially because of how fast it tapped 100.
Yeah.
Um, but like $1,000 oil, that's, I mean, if we're seeing $1,000 oil, it means the US dollar is gone. US dollar is no longer a meaningful currency.
Now we trade in buckets of gas.
Yeah, sure. I know my next car is probably going to be an EV because, like, here,
Wow. You're
a lot of
taking
things
the
are
you're taking the
generation.
plunge, huh?
Yeah, I know. I mean, well, I've got a real car, so I might as well get a toy too. Get one of each.
Yeah, you can put gas to power the solar that powers your car.
Yeah, if you like losing money, but no, I mean, power's fairly cheap, especially at night in France. And it's all nuclear, so it's going to be fairly stable, more or less.
Yeah, I'm waiting for them to build the nuclear cars, where you just have like a nuclear conductor in the trunk. Just don't
There
get
we
in
go.
an accident.
Yeah, perfect.
And
Yeah.
it can just like have a little funnel that collects rainwater that just, I think we got a good business model here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've been deep in the trenches on this transaction. We're gonna actually keep this live stream short because got a lot on our plate here trying to get this thing over the line. But yeah, it's so many moving parts. It just makes your head spin. But yeah, we're on track and things are definitely progressing. This is a big month for what we're doing.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, we're kind of in this like holding stage right now. So it's about the most uninteresting thing because we're not really pontificating, we're closing, and like you know, we have a lot of anticipation of what it looks like on the other side of the close. But yeah, right now it's just is what it is, and we have to just kind of get, you know, to the last piece of this thing in order to start talking about it and actually start working on it, you know.
Right.
You know, I was also looking at, I mean, obviously we know that the crypto market is in despair. I think you can confidently call this the bear market, whatever that bear market cycle looks like this time around. But, you know, a lot of people were indifferent, including myself, actually, you know, to like the 4-year cycle or 5-year cycle, whatever. And we're thinking that, you know, with all the institutional involvement that it would just keep or leg up for the next, you know, leg. But where we are actually is that the greed and fear index is at an all-time low. I think last I looked, it was like way below 10 and maybe even down at like 3 or 4. And, you know, Bitcoin around when it was getting down into that 60, you know, sub 65 level. So like 60 to 65 was arguably the most oversold Bitcoin's like ever been, which is significant. I don't know if that's actually true, but I did hear that. And that's significant because if you look at kind of the normal pattern, specifically on Bitcoin, you know, the low of the next cycle is always the high of the previous cycle. So it's like matching up perfectly around this 60, you know, the confluence around the 60,000 number, whether it was 63 or, you know, what exchange you were on, somewhere in the 60s number as that was previous high. And now that's where we are. So, you know, is there a world where it could leg down into the 50s briefly? Yeah, sure. I've seen people even pontificating about 40, which I don't think is going to happen, but could some black swan event happen and you could see it wick there? For sure. But regardless of if it gets down to that level briefly, because it did this actually back in 2021, 2022 period, the FTX crash, where it did wick down into that like 15, 16, 17 level, and then but was hanging out in the 22 level for a long time. And I feel like that 2022 level back, you know, 4 years ago, is today's like 65 to 73 level. Like, it just feels like that's kind of like that level where we just kind of range in that space. And then hopefully you get an epic reversal and blow through 125 and leg up for the next thing. That could take a year or two.
Yeah, I was talking to my friend about that just like before this call, and he was saying that like, yeah, you know, they're all bullish that we're like, oh, we're about to have a breakout soon. And I'm like, I don't know. If we're just following the patterns that have happened every single cycle, then this is actually pretty normal. And, you know, it's going to consolidate for a while and just be bouncing in this range for a year until you get kind of this buy the rumor, sell the news leading up to the halving. And then, you know, nothing generally happens during the halving. And then shortly thereafter, we start to get some sort of news that creates an uptick in the price.
I think there's two forces that are pushing on Bitcoin. One's pushing it down, one's pushing it up. One's pushing it down is negative sentiment in the market. Negative sentiment in the market is oil's going up. So when oil goes up, somebody's got to lose. So, you know, S&P 500 is not looking hot for the near future. And then when Saudi money stops flowing into investments, like a lot of these, like the AI bubble, that type of stuff, that's bad news for everyone. However, the good news for Bitcoin is that it also kind of trades as an inflation hedge. I know it's not really inflation hedge, but people kind of think it is, and that's all it takes is for enough people to kind of jump on board because they're trying to get out of other things. And if people think that other people think, then that even can be enough. So what I see is there's these two forces pushing against each other on Bitcoin. One is pushing it up because people are trying to get out of classical assets that they're worried about, and one's pushing it down because the future of the stock market is very uncertain right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Look, and there's clearly a lot of uncertainty, on a geopolitical basis. Nobody knows what's going on, and that's not good. That's not good. And now we're in another, clearly America has entered into a full-scale hot war. And you're just hoping it doesn't, escalate beyond what's already pretty heavy escalation. But we've seen, it was interesting too, because on the, they started this war on a Saturday, and so everyone was thinking that like market open on Monday was going to be, messy and volatile. And then and I had this weird feeling that like everyone was just going to go in just shorting, and that was going to be, it would be a reverse trade situation. Cause like, as like if it was easy, everyone would be billionaires, so it's like, everyone goes in with the same mentality. And of course, the market goes the other direction to cook, people shorting, whatever. And Bitcoin had, it didn't go up, but there was definitely, it was more of an up than a down, or at least a stronghold with a little bit of like vertical movement. So I think we're kind of at this juncture where, we're just ranging. That's really what it is. Like, when Bitcoin got up to like 73 the other day, people were like, oh, I think we could go to 80, we could go to 88. And then it went to 68, so it's like, it's not, there's no real sentiment that's going to push the price up substantially per se. But there's also, it seems, a floor at this point, and short of like some black swan situation, this is probably the place that we're going to be for the foreseeable future. I could see if like, there was like a cessation in the conflict, that you could see the markets pop and you could see Bitcoin, head up towards 80. Like, I think something like that, some news event, something that's going to be, driving buy pressure, or at least kind of like, a sentiment shift.
Except while we're having this conversation, Bitcoin is pumping. So it'd be classic as we FUD Bitcoin, it just like flies to 100 right now while we're talking.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is. I wouldn't use the word pumping, but yeah, that's a pretty good candle. But the resistance is like right at this level. It's 71.3 actually. This is where, the resistance actually is. So it's like, but yeah, this is a good, this is definitely a good move. There's no question about it. This is definitely the highest it's been in a, in a beat. And it's, we haven't gotten out of the EMA. I don't think we're out of the EMA on the daily until like 75. And then there's just so much resistance heading up towards 80. Like, I don't know. But to your point, like, I think you'll see, you'll see this kind of begin, I think, at least ranging in this level, and hopefully we can start to build, on the chart of like a bottom over the next month and change. And
well, I think it could have a pretty big impact is if the government comes out and they're not going to say it, but the bond market, and they say, okay, we're going to have to print a bunch of money. You could some kind of shadow quantitative easing because they need to build missiles, and it's going to be bad for the dollar, and so people are going to go to things that are not dollars.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
but technically that's been helping the gold market more than the crypto market.
Well, yeah, because central banks they like their shiny rock, and they're big movers. The crypto, yeah, I mean it's always gonna, or I mean for a long time anyways, it's always gonna be kind of the little brother of gold. The argument that's made that Bitcoin could win over gold is that long term. That was Safdin Amoria. In the Bitcoin standard, the argument was that because you can transmit it between countries very quickly, you don't
Right.
need to transport it, you don't need to assay it to verify it's good, that it could take the place of gold. But maybe by the end of the century.
We got a long ways to go. I think in the short term, that's not coming. I mean, a lot of people are very bullish because the Clarity Act and all this regulation, and that unlocks trillions of dollars from these banks to be able to move all their money into Bitcoin. But what they're failing to understand is that the banks don't do anything quickly. Like, okay, yeah, we're now allowed to. Cool. Let us slow roll this into potentially integrating it into our current business, but they're not going to change what they've been doing for 100 years just because an act passed the House and Senate and got signed into law. And now it's like, all right, let's pull the e-brake, jerk the wheel left, and let's just go down this fucking off ramp and see where it takes us, and see if we still survive the end of it. So I'm bullish on the long-term scope of what's possible with crypto. And I've been a believer since I discovered the technology many moons ago. But nothing happens quick, and these institutions are just starting to say it's okay, but we know that it's a 5 to 10 year cycle before they're really significantly moving capital into this market.
We'll have to see. I think, at this point, it's not, I know. We know that the crypto market is driven by sentiment predominantly, right? And it's interesting too, because you have Michael Saylor continuing to buy Bitcoin. He just bought another $500 million worth of Bitcoin.
Over $1 billion.
Oh, it was over $1 billion?
Well, he did 2 buys, I think.
Oh,
I just read he did another buy of like over $1 billion. I don't know.
I mean,
guy's a savage. You got to respect the guy's conviction.
Conviction is unwavered, and it's clearly because I don't know what the strategy market cap is, but I mean, clearly he's just going to keep borrowing against it and keep extracting value from it, buying up Bitcoin. And it's actually the most psycho thing ever, because he's basically he's basically longing. What's that?
He's short selling the dollar.
He's longing strategy and longing Bitcoin and borrowing against the market cap of strategy, which is also substantiated by the market cap of Bitcoin. And so I think at one point he just goes, hey, if Bitcoin keeps going down, I'm just going to keep buying it. And every time I buy it, it keeps substantiating my treasury because of the liquidity nature of it. And so it's like, there is basically no floor for him on where he can go, because he can just keep borrowing against that market cap. And it just, I mean, there might be people selling and there might be people buying.
It's like it's not like a REIT, but it's like similar to what they're doing in real estate, where you're, borrowing money to buy real estate, which goes up in value, which allows you to borrow more money to buy more real estate, which goes up in value. So he's doing that same thing with crypto. And he'll just borrow unlimited money to buy Bitcoin, because when you look at the long run, you just know that it's going up over a 5, 10, 20, 30 year cycle, which is how you're looking at real estate as well. Real estate can go up and down, but over your 30-year mortgage to buy a house, it's going up.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's only possible to do that with Bitcoin. Like, you can't do that with Ethereum or any other alt, because there's just nothing really substantiating the price value to the extent that Bitcoin, or in comparison to Bitcoin, I should say. And similar with real estate, because like, of course, can real estate prices go down? Yeah, of course they can. I mean, you're not guaranteed that the price of real estate always goes up. But for the most part, long term, you can kind of extrapolate that previous trends are going to probably precipitate into the future. And so it's a good thesis that's investable against, and people can go, oh, I believe in that thesis and I'm going to be alive for X number of decades more, and so yeah, let me park my money there. I think if you look at the history of Bitcoin, right, going back now 17 years, you can look at that and say, I can extrapolate a forward thesis that probably is going to have some type of similarity to what's happened in the past, and so okay, we'll park some cash there, and oh, we're down, but if we keep buying, the dip and keep dollar cost averaging in, then at some point when we do get a reversal, we're up. And he was up like just shy of $50 billion at one point on this trade. So it's like, it's at least something he can point to. He's in a weird place though, because obviously he was up on the trade substantially and never took any liquidity to buy the dip. And right. And it's a weird thing, because if he was to quote unquote sell, what kind of signal would that be to the Bitcoin community? It's like, Michael Saylor's selling. That's not good, because he said that he's a long-term.
It would be devastating.
So he's in a tough spot, because like, yeah, you could be up, but with a proxy to taking liquidity off of the increase in value of the Bitcoin treasury is obviously just selling your strategy stock, so it's like he's probably thinking, hey, if you need to sell and you want to swing trade strategy against the price fluctuations of Bitcoin, then do it, no problem. And
well, that's why the haters call it a Ponzi scheme, because they're like, you're taking this money from strategy to buy this asset to make the value of strategy go up, to go buy the asset, when there's
but it's not a Ponzi,
people that don't believe in Bitcoin, I'm talking about, they're just saying there's eventually that Bitcoin's worth nothing and strategy's worth nothing, and you've been just moving money around.
Look, the thing about Ponzi schemes that are so interesting, first off, most people misuse the word. They don't. If you look up the definition, it really implies something fraudulent.
Of course.
And so, but here's the funny thing: if the definition that most people think of a Ponzi, which is not generally correct, where you say, someone bringing in new money to pay back old investors, you can literally apply that to like almost any company ever, because like you're constantly bringing in new money. And if anybody's taking an exit with the new cash, you could always just say, hey, you're just using new money to pay off old investors. You could always use that definition. But that's actually not the true definition of a Ponzi scheme, because a Ponzi scheme actually implies that there's fraud taking place, fraud and deception. And
that's a speculative bubble.
Right. And a speculative bubble doesn't imply a Ponzi or fraud.
Sure. And I don't necessarily agree with that theory.
I'm just saying that's a lot of people go, it's Ponzi. And people could say that Bitcoin's a Ponzi. And we've heard a lot of good arguments for why crypto could be viewed that way. And there are certainly a lot of bad actors.
It's not. It's a speculative bubble. That's the only.
Are you talking about for Bitcoin, or are you talking?
Yeah, that's the only thing that any of this stuff can be, is a speculative bubble.
I was more talking about on a micro basis. I was talking about a micro basis, like individual projects can certainly be. There's plenty of fraud.
So if they right. That's yield farming. Yes, yield farming can be an actual, by definition, Ponzi scheme. The reason is because what you would do is people buy your token from you put the money in a vault somewhere, and then you say, oh yeah, we're yield farming, but actually you're taking the money out of the vault and paying it out in yields, but that's from the money that they gave you to buy the token.
Sure.
And you had all the tokens, and then you're creating this yield, and everybody's like, yeah, I gave some money, now I'm making all this yield.
Right.
That is by definition a Ponzi scheme. And that's why yield farming there was some regulatory hit to yield farming 3 years ago or something, because, and the SEC was actually very, very correct about this. The way they said, some of these yield farming schemes are fronts for Ponzi schemes, and that was exactly right, the way that they used the word. But yeah, it's very frustrating. People can just go Ponzi, 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 Ponzi.
Yeah.
Like as if, what is the housing market a Ponzi? Is a gold a Ponzi? Is the U.S. dollar a Ponzi? You're not making any sense at that point. You can, as you said, apply it to anything.
Yeah, I actually there was someone who said something. It was like probably a video. He was on a podcast, and he was basically saying that Bitcoin's a complete scam, and he's one of those guys, just like a full-on naysayer. And he was also arguing that Bitcoin's not a currency. He's just like, it's not a currency. No one will ever use it as a currency, blah, blah. And I came up with a funny argument, which is that there's not a single person on planet Earth that wouldn't take the shirt off their back for a Bitcoin. Just because, even if you think it's worthless, you probably still take your shirt off and say, hey, yeah, sure, I'll take a Bitcoin. Is it worth a penny? Is it worth $1? Is it worth $60,000? Like, you can have my shirt for a Bitcoin. Sure, whatever. In that case, it's an exchange of value. And so you can argue that it's a currency. Now, you could probably argue the same thing for like a rock, that you find on the street and be like, hey, you give me a penny and I'll give you a rock. And you could probably do that exchange and argue that rocks are currency. So, sure, we could be pedantic about it. But the reality is that Bitcoin is much more liquid, and maybe, and I argue, the most liquid asset on the planet, because there is no other asset that is so universally liquidatable on a universal basis. Doesn't matter if the price is down, if the price is up, you can liquidate Bitcoin. There's a buyer. And now I'm just talking about the paradigm that we live in, the era that we live in right now, because I'm not going back to 2010 when maybe there was less liquidity and also more friction from a technological standpoint. But now with where cellular, mobile, app, and blockchain are intersecting today, if you have Bitcoin, doesn't matter how much it is, doesn't matter if it's literally fractions of a Bitcoin worth pennies, you can get cash for that in a digital form of cash, but you can get cash for it right now. And to argue that that somehow doesn't define a currency is just kind of, in my opinion, ignorant. And you could get into people that could argue that at some point that currency could go to zero, or that you're the greater fool by buying it today because somebody else means that they're selling it to you. Those are all valid arguments, to the extent that you could also apply them to any stock and any other currency. Like, we've seen currencies get inflated to death. We've seen failed states occur in this world that we live in today. And I've held stock, in companies that make tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and had that stock literally go to zero and the company go out of business. And all of a sudden, I can't even sell that stock. I actually have some stock in one of my accounts that the company went bankrupt. It was obviously, I think it was called SFX. It was a touring company. They did events for electronic music and stuff like this. And it went bankrupt. I still have the shares. There's nothing I can do with them. I can't sell them. I can't even get rid of them. There's like a process where you can basically somehow get the shares out of your account and just basically be like, tell whoever your accounts with, and just say, hey, just remove these and throw them in the garbage can. Like, just get them out of my account. But literally, I can't even remove them. It's kind of the same thing to like crypto. When a coin dies and you still hold the coin in your wallet, like, you can just send it to a burn address, but like, that's pretty much your only option. That happens with stocks. So this
you might not have enough money to pay the gas fees, though.
Yeah, you got to have enough money to pay the gas fees. But so you actually lose money getting rid of it. But it's interesting because a lot of people will be like, I only want to invest in things that have revenue and substantiate its value. Well, it only has revenue until it doesn't have revenue, and then it all of a sudden doesn't substantiate the value, and then it goes bankrupt.
There's just so much systemic risk that's related to, you've got all these companies, and you get one thing like the price of oil or like LNG, and all of these companies that seem very diversified, all of a sudden you realize they're not. That's a huge problem. Same thing as with the housing market. Housing market, real estate seems so diversified, but and I think banks kind of convince themselves that all these mortgages are super diverse because there's no way everybody's going to lose their job at the same time. But then, well, of course they lose their job at the same time. That's what an economic crisis is.
Right.
Yeah. And then, the mortgages all get written down. And or here's another one. Banks all thought, oh yeah, federal debt is as good as gold. It's worth its weight in gold. Well, so they stocked up on all these treasury notes, thinking it's impossible that anything could happen to the treasury notes in like 2019, right? Yeah. All of a sudden, interest rate goes from 0 to 5%, 4%. And then everybody wants new debt from the government. Nobody wants the old debt anymore. Now, the treasury notes are still good, and they're still going to get paid, but you can't move those anymore, not at face value. So there's a lot of things that look really diversified. They look really stable. But when you pull back the covers a little bit, they're actually not at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the bottom line is that if you want to be, the safest way to make money is to take profit. That's just the safest way to make money, because at some point, assuming that you made an investment into something that was legitimate, at some point, and even potentially something that was illegitimate, at some point it was up and you could have taken profit, or it will be up and you will have the opportunity to take profit. And if you don't take profit, and then it goes down below your purchase price, you're in a little conundrum there, because you go, dang, I could have made money on this. Now I'm down. So now you're down. You have to change your whole entire, thesis. You have to go, well, I believed in it when I entered it at 100. Now it's at 80. So I should still believe in it. I should believe in it even more at 80 because it's a better price than I entered it. And that's what Michael Saylor's doing. He's going, hey, I was up over here. Now I'm down here. So I still believe in it. So I should still be able to go in and double, triple down on it. But psychologically, that's not how people think. People go, oh, my investment thesis has been invalidated. Now I'm down. So let me preserve capital. Let me take a small loss and, to protect my downside. It's just, and you totally throw out the window the whole thesis that let you go into the deal in the first place.
Right.
That's what generally happens. That's why there's that joke, which is like, people basically buy green candles and sell red candles. It's just like buy high, sell low. It's just, because the psychology of green light, red light is, really affects people, and people just don't like to be down. They'll look at their portfolio if it's up slightly or break even forever. And the second there's just a little bit of red there, they start to question themselves, and they start to reevaluate, and they start to potentially panic and make, decisions that, negatively impact their, entire, investment thesis, but like your entire portfolio.
Well, God bless Michael Saylor and his cojones of steel, because those things are rock solid.
There was something in the Epstein files about him. Somebody said he's so autistic, I don't even know how to blackmail him.
That makes a lot of sense.
What he is able to do, and I mean, any leader of any company should take a note, but he has an uncanny ability to keep people, engaged in his thesis, and I mean, that you keep getting hit with, downward pressure on your main investment to the tune of he's down 50 billion at a profit. Now he's in $7 or $8 billion in deficit and negative. So you have a $60 billion swing, and then you go find yourself another $1.5 billion to dollar cost averages. That's
That's a gangster shit right there.
He just needs to control, or he needs to predict the instability, or sorry, the volatility. He needs to predict the volatility of the Bitcoin market or the Bitcoin dollar market, because he's playing with Bitcoins on one side and with dollars on the other with his debt. He needs to be able to predict the volatility, because he can be right in the long term, as many people have been. They've been right. They did the right thing, but they used too much leverage, and so they got wiped out in the middle because of volatility. So as long as he can control volatility, he's he's going to own the earth.
Yeah.
But
well,
if it gets too volatile for him, he could get the equivalent of a margin call, however that works out for his company.
Yeah.
And that would be a bad outcome.
Yeah. So we got a question. Somebody on YouTube said, would it be possible to get an understanding on how the acquisition will be announced / rolled out? And so the answer to that is, once the acquisition is concluded definitively, we are engaging a PR firm to announce it, and we also have been kind of seeding it with some major publications to write a bigger story on it, and so that should happen within, I'd say, 1-2 months after we close the acquisition, probably closer to a month out, I'd say. But yeah, that's the strategy as of now, to kind of come out, talk about what has happened, and use that as momentum to start driving people in. We'll also have been working on creating a kind of a destination that pre-launch, where we could drive people and start capturing people who are interested in the story so that they can follow along. And so that's happening kind of simultaneously, of creating a website destination where we'll drive people when the news is announced, so that as people are excited, we have a place to connect with them.
Yeah. Look, I think we said this before, but we can kind of pepper it in again, which is, because of the familiarity that the market has with this particular asset and brand, it will be newsworthy and will get a lot of coverage. Just whatever, like if we made an announcement, it would be syndicated widely with people talking about it. And that was one of the main drivers of doing this type of deal. Is, with Packet itself, it was just always, we had to push, like, we would put out a press release and that would on one place and it wouldn't get syndicated. And, and it's hard to get, to build that kind of like broad awareness for something new is just hard. It's always going to be hard. Anybody starting a new company, even if that company raises a lot of money. And, I follow a lot of what's happening in the VC markets and private equity markets. And there's companies raising money all the time, but I've never heard of them. And, I think that's a big thing, is like, how do you go from something new, something obscure, something even fresh and exciting, to something that is reportable, followable, or kind of capturing the minds and attention of the public. And that's just a really hard thing to do. It usually just takes time and money and persistence to get there. And if you're pushing, if you're offering a product and or capturing some sort of virality, and again, virality doesn't even get you broad market awareness, depending on like the significance of the virality. But nowadays you like really need some other catalyst, whether it's like a big celebrity or a big company behind you, or, just hard to break through the noise today. So with something like this that existed basically 2 decades ago, and was very much like a first mover, in the entertainment space on the streaming side of things, it will, be notable. A lot of people know about it, but it will be notable transaction. So yeah, I think it's the way we see it, and don't want to underestimate the amount of work we have to do, but it's really dropping a rock in a pond, and like we think there will be a lot of waves that will be created by that, and we're already talking with a lot of companies, celebrities, brands that want involvement, or basically kind of coming to the table and talking with us to get into the ecosystem that we're building, just because, or reactivating, I should say. And that's been giving us, good confidence that this is heading in the right direction. So, and then the goal, of course, is that it has its, we can highlight its connection, into, Packet. And we also want to use this as a, catalyst to build a closer relationship with the Coinbase folks, and, and the base community, and hopefully put a solid highlight on, Packet just being like wildly undervalued, looking at where the market cap is today, and building some confidence that there's a real roadmap, ahead of us. So that's the goal. Hopefully it answers your question.
Yeah, they said, will there still be 2 stages to the announcement as mentioned previously in the roundtable? I don't really know what 2 stages he's referring to specifically, but yeah, I mean the strategy is kind of as we laid out. We're going to announce it, and then there'll be a whole kind of rollout strategy of how we're getting to launching it in beginning of next year.
Yeah, I think maybe they were referring to like the awareness, the initial kind of like awareness versus like the marketing of the product and service. So it's like, yeah, there's going to be a later date where everything's ready to launch, closer towards the end of the year, at beginning of next, where we'll be doing a more concerted marketing push. Maybe
Sure.
they're referring to that versus like just making like an announcement, and building kind of like preliminary communications and publicity around, the acquisition, and, some of the strategies and directives. So yeah, in that sense, it is 2 different things, because like, one, you're driving customer acquisition, and one, you're just building awareness. So the customer acquisition marketing plan will be, yeah, and it wouldn't be on day one, because we would only do that when we're ready to market and sell a service.
Right.
And in this case, it's a free service, so we're not selling anything, but still marketing and driving customer acquisition, versus this initial awareness or publicity campaign. Yeah, it's going to be more measured, and we're not doing customer acquisition to start.
All right, cool. Well, I think we could leave it there and catch you guys next week. If you have any more questions, jump into the chat on Discord or on Telegram, and happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, awesome. Good to see you guys.
All right, gentlemen.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Cheers.
All right.